We're just getting used to this format. This is Lauren Sams, my
Hi.
dear friend and colleague, and as of today, my facilitator?
Co-host?
Co-host.
I was going to go with co-host.
We're workshopping. If anyone's got any job titles for Lauren,
Yeah,
please send them in.
put them on the chat.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Exactly.
Wonderful.
You were actually speaking. I'm going to be quiet and let you do that.
Well, thank you. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm currently broadcasting from, the Yagara and Turrbal people. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and I acknowledge that this land always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Before I hand back over to our speakers this evening, I'd first like to reiterate some of the information that was mentioned to you earlier in the email that you got. You've been automatically placed on mute, and you'll remain so throughout the event, but I will unmute everyone at the end so that you can join me in thanking our speakers for the evening. Meg is keen to answer your questions towards the end of the event, so if there's time, so please send them through to me in the chat box as soon as you think of them. If you can't see it, then you can find the button that will open it towards the bottom left of your screen. Your questions will come straight through to me, and I'll read them out along with your name as soon as I'm prompted to do so. I'd also like to mention we have a special promotion for everyone in attendance tonight. If you use the code EVENT at the checkout, then you'll receive 10% off all books ordered from our website within the next 24 hours. And I'll post the link.
That include us, because we're attending.
Oh yeah, it does.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Thank you.
We're stocking up at the second that, sorry.
No, you're welcome to buy us off the shelves, please.
Great. Thank you.
And I'll post the link to Sorrow and Bliss shortly, so you can make sure that you can grab your copy early. You can buy it as well, Meg, if you like.
Thank you. I was hoping for a free one from the publisher, but no.
You'll get one, maybe.
Yeah, do you reckon? No, maybe one. Like staff discount. I don't know how that works.
At least 30%, I hope.
I think so.
I'd now like to introduce Meg. Meg began her career at the Financial Times and the Times of London. Her work has since appeared in the Sunday Times, the Sydney Morning Herald, and the Sunday Telegraph. She has written humour for the New Yorker and Sunday Style, monthly columns for GQ and Inside Out, and is now a regular contributor to Vogue, Elle, and Marie Claire. Her first book, Say It Again in a Nice Voice, was published in 2012, and her second, You Be Mother, was published in 2017. In conversation with Meg tonight, we have Lauren Sams. Lauren is the fashion editor at the Australian Financial Review. She is a journalist who has worked across magazines and newspapers such as the Sydney Morning Herald, Elle, Cosmopolitan, and Marie Claire. She is the author of 2 books and won her first Oscar in 1999 for Boys Don't Cry. She's a good friend of Meg's and loves her books, so don't expect any hard-hitting questions tonight. Lauren and Meg, I'd now like to hand back over to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Genevieve. That was great. And really thought someone would edit that Oscar bit out, because it's not something that I define myself by anymore. It was just nice to be nominated. But anyway.
It was a time in your life, but do you know what I mean? You want to be known for other things.
I do.
I get it.
Anyway, it was a creative pursuit, but it's fine.
Yeah.
This is Sorrow and Bliss, which is what we're here to talk about. And I have the great pleasure of being Meg's friend, but also one of Meg's first readers, which is like just such a delight and a highlight. I first read this book in January, and I declared it one of my, I declared it my favorite book of the year in January. It's now September, and I stand by that claim.
Oh my gosh, that's because making a claim like that in January, it's a fool's game.
But people do it.
That's true. But yeah,
look, I stand by it. It is such a delightful book. Most of the time when Meg and I talk, we are either making fun of ourselves, each other, or more likely other people. So this is going to be really hard for us to be serious, and we really hope that we can be. But I will take a moment of earnestness to tell you about how much I adored this book and how much I think you will too. Sorrow and Bliss is the story of Martha. We meet Martha at her 40th birthday party, where she is absolutely awful to everybody in the room, including her husband, who is the kindest and most patient man seemingly on earth. He is there as well. He has organized the party and by all accounts has done a really splendid job of it. And at her 40th birthday party, she tells us that it's the end of her marriage, that her marriage is breaking down. And we then go back and we see Martha as a teenager. We meet her mother, the sculptor, Celia Russell, and we meet her father, who is a sort of a failed poet. Would you say failed poet?
Yep.
Her mother makes sculptures from found objects, so forks, a lot of forks,
bits of washing machine,
pegs, wire, all sorts of just paraphernalia, detritus, really. And the house is sort of strewn with these objects. Her sister Ingrid is an absolute wonder and my favorite character in the book, and I look forward to the screen version where she will be played by Emily Blunt. That's
interesting. Yes, I would love to hear anyone who's read it. I would love to hear your casting.
Well, I'll get to that question.
Yeah, and then we could all maybe spend 5 minutes just manifesting that. Do you know what I mean? Like, could we manifest a screen version?
Well, I think if we get Emily Blunt, her brother-in-law is Stanley Tucci, and he can be Robert.
Let's manifest all of them. Yeah. I just need to look up how to manifest stuff on the side.
Put it in the chat. So we meet Patrick when Martha is a teenager as well. And this is a story of a marriage and a family. And we meet Patrick through Celia, the sculptor, through her sister's family. And her sister has had the good sense to marry money. And she lives in this enormous mansion in Belgravia and has, a roster of children around her and is always busy sort of, doing lots of administrative housework that comes with being a wealthy housewife, but she is also a delight, and we'll get to her later. This is the story of a marriage. It is the story of a family, but mainly it is Martha's story, and Martha is a really tricky character to love because she does not make life easy for herself. She suffers with a mental illness, and she has these extreme bouts of sadness and desperation and devastation, coupled with moments of truly heightened emotion and love and, sorrow and bliss. But she has moments of being absolutely atrocious to people around her, and then, will turn around and be deeply compassionate and beautiful to people, to strangers on the street. Is it worth just confessing at this point that I didn't actually know that she was atrocious until it was pointed out to me after the manuscript was actually finished, when an editor overseas described Martha as casually cruel. And it's an apposite description, but when I first heard it, I was like, what? No, she's not. Everything she says is just empirically true. I don't know what you're talking about. She's just stating facts. And then I kind of reread it through that lens, and I'm like, oh, she's horrible. She's a monster. But in her defense, in her serious defense, she's unhappy. She's truly unhappy. Unhappiness can make the kindest person mean. That is my only defense of Martha. And we do meet her at her absolute rock bottom, which is a challenging place now that I think about it, to start a novel, to present somebody's core unlikableness, since that's a huge issue, for readers and writers, to give you everything bad first. Now that feels like a gamble. But I think that is a gamble. I think that's, and I have to say, the first couple of pages, I thought, this is not like anything I've read of Meg's, but also I thought this is not like anything I've ever read before. So Martha describes her sadness as like a tiny bomb going off in her head when she's 17. And I think it was a gamble, but it paid off, because you see her helplessness and hopelessness in the face of this illness immediately, and that is what she is up against. That is her challenge. So I want to start with that. It's really different to what you've written before. Yes. How did you come to that? I came to that. It's a story that I've told a few times in the last few days, because yes, that's probably, if you've read anything of mine from magazines or whatnot, or the two previous books, it is quite strikingly different.
And my publisher described it as, she said, you know, with this one, you're passing through the Rubicon and you can't come back. And I was like, that's fine. I'm happy. I've never passed through a Rubicon before. I'm pretty psyched to know what that's
does it
like.
look like, a
I don't
Rubicon?
know. I'll find out.
Okay, good.
But it was purely because it was never meant to see the light of day. It was never intended for anybody but myself. And it was essentially a rehabilitation project after a heartbreaking failure to write a whole novel the previous year, which I did. And a few days before it was due, you know, it was sort of 85,000 words long, and it was just utter trash. It couldn't even be repurposed by Celia into a sculpture. That's how much trash it was. And so I felt that I'd come to the end, that it was finished, that I couldn't write fiction. It's all I'd ever really wanted to do. And I wasn't capable of doing it. And after one book, I'd sort of run out. And so I took some time off. And then I think one of the ways that I would probably, you know, when people say, what makes a writer, I think it's probably that we just can't help ourselves, that we simply have to, that's just how we process. It's kind of how we think things through and know what we think. And so one day I just sat down, and because I was like, you know, that sort of like when you're like, there's no stakes at all, it doesn't matter, everything's ruined, like it's all over. And so thinking that it wasn't a novel and not letting myself believe it was a novel, certainly it wasn't a redraft of that, you know, bucket of trash that I'd created the previous year. And so in that complete freedom, in fact, in this little shed and where Lauren and I are sitting, I just, anything I wanted to write, and anything I found funny, anything I found sad, anything I'd ever seen or felt, or, you know, not my own life story, but any emotion or sort of truth, I suppose, that I'd discovered, it could all just go in there like this big, huge mess of sort of joy. Do you know what I mean? Like in just complete freedom. But the way that the style has evolved, which if you've read it, you might notice that it's slightly peculiarly maybe like staccato, or it's quite basic in its language. And that was a conscious reaction to the fact that the previous year, if you read what I'd written, you would look at the page and be like, here's someone who's trying to write a novel. She's trying to sound novelistic. She's working these metaphors in, and she's trying to make everything fancy. And clearly she spends 8 out of 9 hours a day on thesaurus.com looking up better words for walked or said.
Ambled.
And ambled.
Remarked.
Yeah, we'll be taking suggestions as well. And so once I started doing it, just even within a few days, I was like, just say what happens. Just say what happens. If she walks across the room, she walks across the room. If she picks up a glass, she picks up a glass. She doesn't need to ponder the glass and, you know, hold it up to the light or do anything meaningful. We just pick up glasses. You know what I mean? And I think that's where that's all come from, is I wouldn't let myself do anything that wasn't straight and just saying it and letting it be what it was, which is also where the forms of dialogue evolve, but they're a bit tricky to sort of get into without reading them, but you know, if you haven't read the book yet. But yeah, so it's sort of almost a bit, I don't know if prosaic is the right word, in a funny way. It's like a sort of, it's spare. I think I would say spare. And I think again, it's hard for me to talk seriously and earnestly, but one of the great things that Meg does, and like one of the most brilliant things about you as a writer, is that you're such an amazing observer of people. And I think the way that you have written it in such a spare sort of manner means that you see those observations so clearly, because there's nothing extraneous to it. It's so direct. Lovely, thank you.
Well, you're a great observer. I'm so
in
nervous
fact,
around
anyone
you
who's
all
got
the
their
time.
camera on runs the risk of finding themselves in my next novel, because I'm like, sorry, what's that painting on your wall? I'm just going to make a note of that because it's an occupational hazard.
Well, this brings me to a nice point, because Meg always talks about how much she does not like being asked if her work is autobiographical, and yet in this book
I don't not like being asked it. It's just a challenging question that every writer struggles with, because I read this amazing thing by Evelyn Waugh, which was which pass me that orange book down there under Crudo, that he wrote Brideshead Revisited, and at the very beginning of it he put in a little epilogue, a little author's note that says, I am not I, they are not, thou art not he or she, they are not they, which is basically like, it's not me, everyone, just relax. they are totally they, and he is totally he or she. Like when you read it, if you know anything about his life,
yeah,
a lot of it is. But I think the struggle is always to be able to articulate, you know, it's not your life story. It's not a chronology that follows you through. And then my mum said this, and I'm going to make her name Diane, when it's actually, you know, it's not that simple, but it's this huge, mingling in of anything that you have observed, and you call on all your experiences and emotions, but it produces something which is completely not your life. So it's hard to kind of almost point to, that's autobiographical, that's not, that's my experience, that's completely invented, but you're now going to point to a part that is utterly autobiographical, and I deserve what is coming to me. Let's go.
Okay. So imagine my surprise when I read this. Me and the one other girl who did the website.
This is Martha working at Vogue.
This is Martha working at Vogue.
Yeah, her first job out of university.
We sat far away from the magazine people, but unnaturally close to each other in a cubicle made out of shelving units. We were both, it transpired, anxious not to annoy the other, which was why I worked out how to eat an apple in absolute silence, by cutting it into 16ths and holding each piece in my mouth until it dissolved like a wafer. And why, whenever her phone rang, she would lunge for the receiver, lift it an inch out of the cradle and put it straight back down to stop it ringing. The calls could not have been for us, since no one knew we were there. We started calling it the Veal Crate. So who was that based on?
That was just pure invention, because I've never worked at Cosmopolitan with anyone where we were sat in an internal room that actually, it was a room, but it was essentially a lift shaft because it had no windows. We'd never met before. The apple was actually mine. No, the apple was yours, and I actually had Soylent honey toast. I didn't pick up the phone. I had honey toast that for some reason it was Soylent sourdough, and it smelled atrocious in that office. And that was like the second or third day, and I was like, what do I do with this toast? And ladies and gentlemen, that was Lauren Sams, and she stayed in the picture. So I don't apologize for that, because that's a beautiful memory that's now been immortalized in fiction.
Well, I can't wait to ask you for your next novel how based in fact it is, because clearly, I mean, you know, there's a lot of life experience in here.
And ironically, though, you actually, if you look through it, and if I really did, gun to my head, have to point to what's derived from experience, it's actually usually those tiny little vignettes which appear. They kind of look as though they don't need to be there. They do a relative amount of the lifting when it comes to character. And so those are often the ones where it's some little tiny thing where I've needed to soften Martha really quickly because she's just done something that I latterly realized was awful, or I've had to show some tiny aspect of her relationship with Ingrid. They're the parts where you can quite rightfully be like, I wonder if that's happened to Meg, and I would have to say yes, it has.
Okay, so put that in the group chat if you have read it.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about the setting. So the novel is set in London and Oxford. Tell me why you set it there.
It was real. I don't know whether this is true for other novelists, but I find that the story sets itself where it needs to be set. And I don't think that they're transferable necessarily, or at least the stories that I've written so far could not be lifted out and put somewhere else.
Okay.
So this to me was a London story because it had that, there's an exploration of class in it within the family. So as you said, Celia has married a poet who's referred to as the male Sylvia Plath for about 5 minutes before his career sputters to its premature end. And Winsome, her sister, marries money in the form of a man called Roland, who I imagine in red corduroys, he's never had to work. He has 2 whippets and a Daimler, and that seems to be the extent of him. But oftentimes, I think it was really fun because often you explore class between, you know, unrelated persons or, you know, communities. But I love the idea of class within a family because that actually happens so often, is that there's a financial disparity between family members. And it's the way that it echoes Martha and Ingrid is that they're very close as sisters and they make decisions that separate them as they go. You know, Ingrid has children, Martha doesn't. You know, Celia becomes an artist, Winsome never has to work. And so there's that kind of element. But I think the reason that it needed to be set in London is because there's just nowhere better to explore class. And that was always a huge part of it for me. And just my imagining of the family, because one of the very first little, I guess not really a theme, but one of the first tenets of it was that it was these Martha and Patrick had grown up together.
Yes.
And I love the idea that he's this family friend who she just barely even notices for the first however long because he's just this piece of furniture. Exactly. And then she sort of starts to see him differently. But so that very much to me was these Christmases and this big townhouse. And that was sort of the, you know, the Love Actually aspect of it.
And I guess Patrick is hard to imagine outside of London as well. So Patrick is becomes Martha's husband, and is incredibly kind and patient, but he's a sort of lost soul. His mother died when he's very young, and then his father essentially leaves to live abroad and drops him off at boarding school and doesn't really come back. And it's hard to imagine that happening anywhere but London.
Yeah, I think so, because that's very English, isn't it? And there's even a little section there about Martha discovering the existence of something called boarding school syndrome, which somebody, you know, was a recently named syndrome that sort of, it's described as a PTSD attachment disorder hybrid. And I think it's important to discuss that, because obviously Patrick is kind, he's lovely, but nobody is solely responsible for the dysfunction in a marriage. And I think Patrick is getting a free ride because no, just in general, not a free ride, but he's so overtly lovely, Martha's so overtly awful. But he has to contribute to that in some way, which to me is his intense passivity and his willingness to take her awful behavior truly because he just wants her. And he's wanted her since he was 14. You know, that's the other thing. He's been in love with her since the beginning and sort of has tried to hide it all that time. And so he will do anything to keep her. And so he lets her behave atrociously, when in a healthier marriage, they'll be like, literally can't treat me like that.
Yeah.
So he never says no to her.
He, not figuratively, he literally cleans up her messes. She will throw a garbage bag against the wall and the eggshells and spaghetti will fall out, and
when
she'll come home.
When she's unwell.
Yeah, when she's unwell, and she will come home and not a word will be said about it, but the bag will be gone. And
there's your PTSD. There's your boarding school syndrome in a working
in a little metaphor. Yeah, right
exactly.
There. How hard is it to write about mental illness?
It's hard because you feel immense responsibility. And if we could take a show of hands who has read the book and discovered how the diagnosis is handled, which is not a spoiler, it's redacted. The name of the condition, when she finally finds it, is never named. And it began in my mind as a particular condition, like loosely, that I had a sense of it would be this and, you know, not these other ones. But really quickly, for creative purposes, it evolved away from being anything that I could truthfully say, this is this, you know, this is schizophrenia, or this is bipolar, or NPD, or whatever it was going to be. And I couldn't, as a human being, I couldn't misrepresent something that defines people's existence, and they know, and they've inhabited it, and here's me as some artiste just lying on the page and not representing it properly. And so I was really conscious of that, and I didn't want to make light of it, and I didn't want to just treat it like some authorial device, you know what I mean, to serve my purposes. So and to me, it's not a book about mental health, and I didn't set out to write a book about mental health. I wanted it's about not knowing the reason for who you are, and this thing at the core of yourself. And so it could have been anything. She could have been missing any other piece of information about family of origin, or, you know, any of those things that shaped her experience. But I chose that one because it just worked in the format. But I think, once I had showed it to my publisher after sort of 6 months of working on it, and she said, oh, you actually could publish this, because I sent it to her with a note going, I wrote this and it's not for anyone, I just wanted to show you because it's so much fun, and you can't publish it, I already know, you'd have to let me down gently because I know that it's weird and it's a departure, but it's just, I love it so much, I just want to finish it anyway, so I just thought I'd show you, and then, you know, I'll write you a proper novel plot TBC.
When I have some time.
And so I was just on this jolly. And so anyway, when she said, actually, we could publish this, then I was like, oh my gosh, like this is really serious, and this is something that needs to be done properly. And, you know, all of us have either experienced mental illness, cared for someone with mental illness, or, you know, 3 out of 4 of us probably. And our experiences are so varied, but I think there just is, you just have to do it respectfully to everybody's I can't quite describe it, but I did feel a weight of responsibility in doing it properly, because it's a humorous book as well, and so I didn't want to make light of that, but I also wanted to show that it's not all of Martha, and you can still be a funny depressed person, do you know what I mean, like so I wanted to show that. So it was a bit of there were some places where I'm like, oh no, too far, but then other places where I just had to show what the true ramifications were, what the outworking was. So yeah, and then there's, you know, yeah, it's a tricky time to be dealing with all of that as well, with the whole, you know, there's a lot of stay in your lane kind of debate with authors and with what we're allowed to represent that we might not have experienced or we have, and it was this way. So yeah, I thought about it. I thought about it. I really hope I've done okay.
Well, I think one of the things that Meg was just saying is, you know, the book is, I feel like maybe I've painted a grim picture. The book is so funny. It is so funny, and so much of that comes from that human observation that you do so well. But I think there are these moments of humor, but it never feels exploitative or trite or it never feels wrong. And certainly there's no, you know, poking fun at mental illness at all. But, you know, Martha is a brilliant observer of people. And a lot of the humor comes from her relationship with her sister. Can you tell us about Ingrid, who is my ride or die?
Someone asked me, I went into a bookstore yesterday and someone was like, do you have a sister? Is Ingrid your sister? Because I want a sister like that. I'm like, I want a sister like that. I don't have a sister. She is 100% uncut wish fulfillment, which is a character in the novel says that novels are always as an element of wish fulfillment, which actually stole from the mouth of Alexander McCall Smith. So just credit him, maybe write that in.
That's fine, if he's listening.
But that's true. So I don't have a sister. If I got to choose, it would be an Ingrid, who I love for how devoted and fierce and foul-mouthed, and, you know, she's so, I mean, she's not casually cruel, but she's casually just, I don't even know what she is, but she was a joy to write. And I think she's that lovely. I think you need to see when Martha is being awful, I think you need to see that there must be something about her that keeps people in her orbit. So if she was purely awful for no reason, Patrick wouldn't stay, Ingrid wouldn't be. You know, she's later described as, you know, Martha's the love of Ingrid's life. Essentially, they are, and they're so close. And I think that was really important to be able to show, because that's probably when Martha's at her best, is when she's with her sister. And so I think that's the purpose that Ingrid served. But in terms of the mental illness, because you're right, I don't want to poke fun at it, but I wanted to show there's a moment where towards the end when Martha kind of confesses to Ingrid that she's got this diagnosis, and Ingrid's devastated because Martha didn't immediately tell her, and she's like, why didn't you tell me? And she says, well, you know, I would feel judged or whatever. And Ingrid says, well, we as a society have to break down the stigma about mental illness, and which is a valid thing. But Martha's like, I just wish we could build the stigma back up so we could talk about something else.
Just for a change.
That's where I guess some of the kind of the pointiness got in there, because it's a subject, isn't it, for our generation?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there we go. That's Ingrid.
Ingrid, Ingrid tries to give birth and loosen her mucus plug. The words mucus plug are mentioned 6 or 7 times in a page, and Holly is liking this. Thank you, Holly. Ingrid actively tries to give birth as sort of revenge on her Aunt Winsome, and tries to give birth on her Aunt Winsome's nice chairs at Christmas.
Because Winsome suggested she sit somewhere else, or in a different kind of chair.
In a more comfortable chair.
Ingrid had put on such a lot of weight.
Carriage at that point. And so Ingrid, gets very sort of affronted by this, and then tries to bear down as much as possible to have a baby that day. She is fantastic. And their text exchanges. Is this based on your text exchanges with your daughters?
No. I mean, well, to an extent. Do you know what's interesting though? I don't really think of them as, I only realize as, you know, sometimes in books, texts are formatted differently. This is kind of technical. They're typeset differently. They're centered, or they're bold, or they're italic. And it wasn't a conscious choice, but they're just woven through like regular dialogue, because I feel like we've got to the point where they're not distinguishable anymore from speech or other dialogue. Like I feel like text, it's all just merged into one. So I think that's why, and so it's quite a fluid way for them to speak to each other and for everyone to, so I think between Martha and Ingrid, it's particularly important that it's all just this mess, because I get the sense that they're in constant communication with each other. And they're sort of coded, that lovely, closed, private, in jokes galore type thing that we are jealous of.
So jealous.
You don't have
Wouldn't
a
that be
sister,
great?
do you?
No.
Far out.
No.
Yeah.
But we both have 2 daughters, so
That's true. So we can envy them for each other.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway. So yes, that's right.
But that's the way that a lot of the dialogue in the book is written as well. And a lot of it is sort of written from, like you were saying before, it's kind of tricky to explain. If you haven't read the book, I think you'll understand it when you do read it. Some of it is sort of written as if Martha is hearing it and then pouring it out on the page. But it has this very direct quality to it, rather than having, traditional quotation marks, Meg says this, Lauren says this, that sort of thing. And that feels part of that sort of spareness as well.
Yeah, I think that was probably when I struck on it, so to speak. So usually you would say, I'm going to be really brief with this. Look out the window, Lauren said, walking tensely towards the door. In this scenario, it would be, Lauren said, look out the window. She walked to the door. So it's kind of like that. There's no tensely. I banned myself. A few adverbs have crept in, but I tried to ban them as much as I possibly could. And so it's things like that. And sometimes half the speech is out of speech marks, half of it's in, because I think that it just made it seem more realistic, because it's a sort of reporting style that she has.
Right.
That's how she's trying to, because she's just telling you this story. It's just what happened again. So that's where that all kind of evolved from. The text is just part of it. They're just all woven in, and the gifts and everything else that they exchange.
Yeah, it feels naturalistic reporting. Yeah, I think once you read it, you definitely understand that. I want to talk about some of the more minor characters. Peregrine. Can you tell us about Peregrine? He appears in the front of the novel, and he is so a wonder. Yeah,
after Martha gets discovered as not being internet savvy, which is how she got the job at Vogue, they shift her down to World of Interiors, which is, a magazine within that Condé Nast building, one floor down, and
which is a real magazine, right?
Yes. Yeah. And she's employed by her employer as a publisher called Peregrine. We never find out his surname, but apparently it appears so often in the Tatler social pages that they've made it. Do you remember keyboard shortcuts?
Yeah, like a Control-Alt-Delete.
A Control-Alt for his surname.
Yeah.
And he's sort of a man in his late 60s. He's, wears velvet during the day. He's a dilettante, raconteur, lover of beauty.
Yes.
And Martha doesn't have friends. We don't see any of her friends. She often talks about how she's lost contact with them because they all had children and she didn't, and they ran out of things to talk about. So that's this lovely friendship that develops between them based on going out for lunch. She tells Peregrine stories about her childhood, which he loves, and then they play little pen and paper games and things, and then he sort of helps her after the failure of her first marriage. And they have this lovely friendship, and something happens to Peregrine, and the day it happened, this sounds so artiste, but I did cry at my desk, because I was like, sometimes you don't see these things coming. You don't realize, when authors say the characters just take over and they just do stuff in their head,
leap onto the page,
and you're like, do they? Or are you on drugs?
Maybe both.
But sometimes they do. And I mean, I am on drugs, but obviously, how else are you supposed to get the words out? But the day that Peregrine decided to have that thing happen, I was sort of blindsided by it, and I was just a wreck for the rest of it, because I loved him.
Yeah.
He was just, probably he and Ingrid are my two best.
He's a sort of godfather, avuncular figure in her life, and he sort of takes her under his wing and teaches her all sorts of things, and dispenses these little pearls of wisdom, and he's a lovely character.
And I think because Martha has this psychic snap when she's 17, to me part of it is it's a coming of age novel with a very delayed coming of age, so she doesn't really figure out how to be until she's 40, or just after that. And I think, but there are these moments and people who come along and sort of shunt her forward into adulthood, and I think Peregrine's one of them, because he scrapes her off the ground after this aborted first marriage, and and then he sort of passes her along to learn the next thing. But I think there are people like that in our lives who teach us a bunch of lessons.
Absolutely.
And he's one of them.
Very formative kind of person, right?
Yeah, exactly. So he's luscious.
And you hit on one of my other favorite minor characters. So Martha has a very, very short-lived 43-day starter marriage to Jonathan, who I imagine as like Jonathan Rhys-Meyers in like the mid-90s.
Write that down. Who's keeping the casting notes?
Casting notes, please, if there's a director in the room. But yeah, I imagine him to be like extremely handsome, but extreme, like you would look at him and think, what a dodgy character. Just
I think
not
he's
nice.
kind of like a modern day, this is just coming to me now, like a very rich, very suave Mr. Wickham. He's the bad, he's the bad, he's the, what were they called in Jane Austen books? Basically the scoundrel. He's essentially the scoundrel. He's a rascal, he's a scoundrel. He's but he's fun to write, because with actual main real characters you have to show light and dark, but with some like the Jonathans of this world, he can just be uncut awfulness. I mean, you know, as in he's not like a caricature, but I got to throw a lot of stuff at him, you know. He's got this sleek apartment where everything's recessed and hidden and, you know, metaphor. So I don't want to show you how the sausage is made, but that is a metaphor for his general vacuousness and all his hidden secrets and things like that. So so Martha kind of almost marries him in order to just get away, to be someone different, to get away from her parents. She's still living at home, and you know, that desire to just be someone else, be somewhere else, hoping that everything will be different, and he kind of takes her in that direction, and unsurprisingly it doesn't work out.
She thinks that everything he says is a joke, and when it transpires that, you know, he really does think the horrible things that he's saying, you know, when Martha figures that out, she very quickly relieves herself of that situation.
It devolves fairly promptly. So that's Jonathan. Again, learning curve first. Start a marriage.
Before being there. Okay, I'm aware that our time is coming to an end, so please, if you do have a question for Meg, write it on the chat. I can see a couple coming through, but definitely have a go, because she is ready to get rid of me and answer your questions.
Never. We can't get out of this second
veal
crate Mac 2 is you're wedged, so you're not going anywhere.
That's true. She's nearest the door.
I'm the nearest the door, so Lauren can't leave until I say so.
That's actually true. I'll have to climb out the window over there. I guess what do you want people to take away from the novel, apart from there's just so much enjoyment and joy in this novel, and it's a real, I feel like you are a how do I say this nicely? I feel like Meg would like to be a Mitford girl. Would you say that?
I wouldn't like to be, I should have been.
Yeah. You should have been a Mitford girl.
Yeah.
But this novel has the same sort of biting wit, but also just the enveloping comfort of a Nancy Mitford.
They are my comfort reads. Love and a Climate and Pursuit of Love are on fairly permanent rotation. Well, you know, as Likewise. In at least once a year. Exactly. Yeah. If you haven't read those and you've got this discount code, oh my gosh, they need to go in that basket.
And they're Penguin Classics, so they're like $10.
Exactly.
So
what's that,
making money.
I don't want to try and do maths live.
You'll read them like once a year. So cost per read.
Exactly.
Nothing.
No. So what do I want them to take away from the novel?
Yeah.
I hope that they take hope away from their experience, which sounds really lofty, and believe me, I struggle to say it because I'm not a naturally hopeful or positive person. In fact, I sometimes, like, occasionally I get called negative around the house. Do you know what I mean? Sorry, my nickname is Megative.
That is so surprising to me.
I could barely get it out of my mouth.
Oh my God.
General negativity. Anyway.
Would you describe yourself as judgmental?
Casually cruel? No.
Wow.
Observant.
That's very surprising. Observant.
Yeah. This is the part where I fall to pieces and just want someone else to ask a question that's much easier to answer. But I do hope
I do have another easy question.
Finishes on a hopeful note, because I am asking a lot of the reader to come through this journey that is very dark in places, and I hope there's humor along the way to make it bearable. But I just overall, and it doesn't turn out the way Martha necessarily would have wanted it to. It's not all tidy and neat and everything, and it woke up and it was all a dream. But there is this kind of sense of almost everything is suddenly there's new things occurring and there's new things opening up. And it just, to me, I wanted to demonstrate that things can be so bad, like true rock bottom. And this is in real life and this is real life experience. But it's astonishing how things can change and evolve, and if you apply that sort of hard work that Martha and Patrick apply to it, then there is some sort of result and like there's some fruit that is born of that. Yeah, exactly. And so I wanted to end on a hopeful note, and I want people to feel like they've been through something and they've triumphed like Martha has in this funny, strange, sideways way. But hard earned. And I think that's
very hard
adulthood,
earned.
right? Adulthood, everything you have is fairly hard earned. Everything you learned, all the lessons, none of it really comes that easily.
Except for Jonathan.
It turns out, unless you're Jonathan, who ends up married to an influencer.
Yeah, which is great. It's only a few paragraphs, but that's another novel. You could write that novel. You could write that like tonight after I leave.
I think it would be too hard to restrain the casual cruelty though, wouldn't it? Like I couldn't keep the mouse in the house. It would be tricky. It would be tricky. So, do we hand over to Genevieve? Is that what happens now? We're all learning this technology.
Certainly. Yeah, I've got a few questions here.
There you are.
Unless Lauren wanted to ask your last easy question.
Yeah, I did want to ask one question. Why am I not in the acknowledgements or the dedication?
Because you're running the publicity campaign. Look at you. You've got the plumber's role, and she wants more.
I want my name in print.
Is this your copy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Next time.
I'm getting a pen, people.
Yeah.
I'm just adding it while I wait for your question.
There's so many people.
Go for it, Genevieve.
In the acknowledgements and not me.
Yeah. Gosh.
Anyway,
our first question is from Kim. She says, "Hey Meg, once you landed on The Voice, did you plot, pants, or pray your way through to the end?"
Oh, did I plot yes, no, I didn't. I had a rough sense of where I was heading and where I wanted them to end up, but within that, there was twists and turns and things that I didn't expect to happen. And then I realized sort of towards the end that I needed to bring it back around to where it began and things like that. So there were sort of things I needed to do in there. But no, I didn't. It wasn't mapped out in terms of, some people do. I don't know how that works because you don't know the people that you're writing when you start to write them. So how do you know what decisions they're going to make and what pressure will be applied to them that will bring those decisions out? I mean, I'm sure it works for some people, but I don't know how you do it, because to me it's not till you get quite a way in that you're like, oh, that's what she's like. Oh, she wouldn't say that thing I made her say 3 weeks ago. And so no, I don't. But what I do tend to do is, because once you hit about 30,000 words, it is impossible to remember what you've already said. Did you find that?
Oh yeah.
Like after a point?
Yeah.
It's sort of like,
and then you go back, and thank God for editors who are like, you know this person's already dead, don't you? I had a thing where I said that a character couldn't drive, and then like she's driving.
Yeah.
So
it happens, and it looks like a gross oversight, but I promise it genuinely, it sort of is holding all of those. But what I do is I start to then keep a fairly like an actual diary calendar marked on it what happens when, because I need to keep track of it that way.
That's so clever.
Yeah. So and you can print out calendars from 1975 if you need them on the internet. They're all there.
It's good. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And actually Martha's born in 1977, as I am, and I gave her my approximate birthday just to make the maths easier. So I always knew how old she'd be at Christmas. That was the only reason, is to save myself difficult time maths, which I fell into last time, and it was such a mess that I actually had to recruit my husband to come and fix the maths.
Well, you're not a mathematician, you're a writer. You do words,
a cliche.
You don't do numbers.
No, exactly. So anyway, that is the answer to that. I don't. I'm freestyling.
I love that you have an actual physical timeline on a calendar of your book though. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think Tim Winton does that. I think that might be where I heard that. I think his is a diary.
Right.
Mine's an epic roll of IKEA kids painting paper, is essentially how it works. And then a spreadsheet even happened, but that was short-lived.
That's very impressive.
If you can't do it in a Word document, I'm not interested.
Holly says, Meg and Lauren, this chat has been such a joy. Thank you so much. And thank you, Meg, for this novel. I love it with my whole heart.
Thank you, Holly. Who has an epic tattoo, by the way. I wish you could all see it. I've been admiring it. Have you secretly been observing as a novelist?
And the jewelry. Yeah.
Looking really strong. Really strong.
Yeah.
So anyway,
good game, Holly. And you're just at home, just wearing jewelry casually.
I know.
Be my bra.
Exactly.
God, not even.
Plus, if that's not a fake tan, I'm not even like, as in if that's your actual coloring, like
see how pale we are.
Olive skin, we look like ghosts have been dug out of the ground. Anyway.
So pale.
Did Holly have a question? Or did we
sorry. We'll take that as a comment, Holly.
Her question is, how does it feel now to have this novel out in the light now when it was written in the dark?
Oh my God. Sorry.
I'm just question.
I just like want to make a note of that phrasing because that was exquisite.
So nice.
It felt great for 2 days. And then today, this morning, you know when you have a baby and on day 3 you cannot stop crying because all the endorphins have gone, and today was that day, and I burst into tears about 9:30 when I was like, I don't know what actually happened to do it. Oh, did I stray? No, I didn't stray onto Goodreads because I don't do that. I don't do self-harm.
Don't do that.
But
not anymore, you don't.
I read something that, because the response has been really amazing, like quite overwhelmingly so. And not because it's this brilliant writing or anything, but I think just people connect their own experience to it. And someone was telling me that they were crying someone they knew was crying so hard at the end. She was in the bath. I think I've got this right. She was in the bath, sobbing so hard at the end that she pulled something, and her husband was asleep upstairs and he didn't hear her, and she couldn't get out of the bath. So she was in the bath for 20 minutes crying and waiting for him to come and get her because of the book, which is a weird feeling.
Can she write that for the cover of the next
one? If that's true, I hope we'll track her down.
Yeah.
But no, so when things like that start to happen, and, you know, bearing in mind, as you know, these people are in your mind. They're only yours. You made them up. You gave them their names. They were your companions privately for a year, because I didn't even tell my publisher that they existed for 6 months. She didn't know what I was doing. And then when people come up to you and say, oh, I love Winsome, you're like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. And they're like, how do you know about her?
Yeah.
Like it's a really funny feeling. And today, and I'll be happy again tomorrow, but today I was just like, I just want it back. I just want it back. It wasn't meant for anyone. It's stupid. Just give it. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just, I mean, we all feel like that. You feel super vulnerable and you want people to like it, and people don't like it.
But also never talk about it.
But never talk about it. But just buy like 60 copies. Don't lend it to anyone. Make them buy their own. That's all we ask.
Don't get it from a library.
Yeah. So
libraries are great.
Libraries are actually great. Yeah. But in response to your question, it's been a bit of a wild ride. And also there was a pandemic and it delayed, it chiefly affected my book.
Okay.
Which was to delay it.
Which is why I read it in January.
Exactly.
Right?
You read it in January. It's meant to come out in March and then July, and then it came out on Wednesday. So there was a lot of time to kind of prepare and anticipate it. But then you never know what it's actually going to be like until you walk past a bookstore and there it is in the window.
And it's going to look so pretty in the window. Look at the colours. They're just delightful. Where'd my copy go? She's added me to the acknowledgements.
Look at that. Look at the acknowledgements of Lauren. Isn't that massive? That's like a 24-point font they've used there compared to everyone else.
Did they print? Because it's going to take you a long time to write that in everybody's book.
If you could write it in your own, that would be wonderful. So thank you mostly, Lauren. If you could just add that.
Thank you. That's so nice.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes, it's well deserved.
I was actually wondering, and you can say no to this, if you would read to it from us.
Oh, yes, sure. This will be my inaugural reading. I'm pretty good at saying the words.
Yeah.
Shall I page 1, I guess? Because unless you can think of a part, we haven't do you have this?
I do love Ingrid
giving
birth.
Any special requests? Ingrid giving birth. I think it's too long. I think Ingrid giving birth is too long.
It's kind of okay. Should we start with let's start where Martha starts.
Yeah. Okay, let's do that. Sorry, spectacles. At a wedding shortly after our own, I followed Patrick through the dense crowd at the reception to a woman who was standing by herself. He said that instead of looking at her every 5 minutes and feeling sad, I should just go over and compliment her hat. Even if I don't like it, he said, obviously, Martha, you don't like anything, come on. The woman had accepted a canapé from a waiter and was putting it in her mouth when she noticed us, realizing in the same instant that it could not be managed in one bite. As we approached, she lowered her chin and tried to shield her effort to get it all the way in, then all the way out, with the empty glass and supply of cocktail napkins in her other hand. Although Patrick drew out his introduction, she responded with something neither of us could make out. Because she looked so embarrassed, I began speaking as though somebody had given me 1 minute on the topic of ladies' hats. The woman gave a series of little nods and then, as soon as she could, asked us where we lived and what we did with ourselves, and if she was correct in thinking we were married, how long we had been, and how was it that we'd come to know each other in first place. The quantity and velocity of her questions meant to divert from attention from the half-eaten thing now sitting on an oily napkin in her upturned palm. While I was answering, she looked furtively past me for somewhere to put it. When I'd finished, she said she might have actually missed my meaning in saying Patrick and I had never met. He was just always there. I turned to consider my husband, at that moment trying to fish an invisible object out of his glass with one finger, then looked back at the woman and said, Patrick's sort of like the sofa that was in your house growing up. Its existence was just a fact. You never wondered where it came from because you never remember it not being there. Even now, if it's still there, no one gives it any conscious thought. Although I suppose, I went on, because the woman didn't move to say anything, if pressed, you would be able to list every single one of its imperfections and the causes thereof. Patrick said it was unfortunately true. Martha could definitely give you an inventory of my flaws. The woman laughed, then glanced briefly at the handbag hanging from her forearm by its little strap as if weighing its merits as a receptacle. Right, who needs a top up? Patrick pointed his index fingers at me and pumped invisible triggers with his thumbs. Martha, I know you won't say no. No, it's this. Like, I think it can be whatever. So the reader applies their own, the reader projects their experience onto it. So if he's doing that, then that's what it is for you. Postmodernism. Then he said, would you like me to take that too? She smiled and looked like she was about to cry as he relieved her of the canapé. Once he had gone, the woman said, you must feel so lucky being married to a man like that. I said yes, and thought about explaining the drawbacks of being married to someone everybody thinks is nice, but instead I asked her where she got her amazing hat and waited for Patrick to come back. The sofa became our stock answer to the question of how we met after that. We did it for 8 years with few variations. People always laughed. One tiny Ingrid section follows. There's a gif called Prince William asking Kate if she wants another drink. My sister texted it to me once. She said, I am crying. They're at some kind of reception. William is wearing a tuxedo. He waves at Kate across the room, mimes the upending of a glass and points at her with one finger. The pointing thing my sister said, literally Patrick though. I wrote back, figuratively Patrick though. She sent me the eye roll emoji, the champagne flute and the pointing finger. The day I moved back in with my parents, I found it again. I have watched it 5,000 times. There we go. Thank you for listening to that one.
Oh, that was wonderful. And thank you so much for this conversation. It's just been marvelous hearing like the rapport between you two. I've enjoyed it very much. And I'll just unmute our guests so we can all say thank you for this. One moment. This is always the awkward bit when I press the right buttons. Not muting, just
in your position. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for giving us your Friday night. Isn't that not meant to be muted? Are we meant to be muted?
No, you're not. I pressed the wrong buttons. There we go.
Holly's laughing at us. Can you please make Holly be nice?
Yes.
And I only know this lovely lady. She only comes through as a number, but the lovely lady who just waved at us with the glasses. Hello. Yes, exactly. Thank you all. And Jessica, Sharon, Muscle Cheek, Kim Lawless, everyone else's name who has just disappeared. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Lauren, for indulging me.
No problem. It was my pleasure.
Lauren's book, she's having her baby. The other one's called Crazy, Busy, Guilty. Margaret Atwood says, always hold up the book. No, Margaret Atwood did love it. But she lent it to someone, which is pretty mean.
She'll never find it.
Yeah, she'll never get it back.
One of those people that'll never get it back.
Yes, it's a beautiful book as well. So
it's buy this, buy one for your friends. Christmas,
congratulations, Meg. Oh, thank you, everyone. Oh my God. And hopefully we'll be to Brisbane soon. When you let us back in, we'll pop up.
We would love that. Thank you and good night.
Good night, everybody. Have a good weekend.